Okay. Welcome everyone to Journeys to the Books of the Prophet. Okay. I'm not sure where that came from. Okay. We are continuing. Welcome everyone to Journeys to the Books of the Prophet. Okay. Hold on one second. I'm not sure where that came from. Okay. We are continuing. Welcome everyone to Journeys to the Books of the Prophet. Okay. Hold on one second. I'm not sure where that came from. Okay. We are continuing. Welcome everyone to Journeys to the Books of the Prophet. Okay. Hold on one second. I'm not sure where that came from. Okay. We are continuing. Welcome everyone to Journeys to the Books of the Prophet. Okay. Hold on one second. I'm not sure where that came from. Okay. We are continuing. Welcome everyone to Journeys to the Books of the Prophet. Okay. Hold on one second. I'm not sure where that came from. Okay. We are continuing. Welcome everyone to Journeys to the Books of. Let's start all over from scratch.
I just start recording again.
I should just start teaching. Okay. Okay, sorry everyone. Something went haywire here. I'm going to start again from the beginning. One second. Welcome everyone to Journeys to the Books of the Prophets. We are continuing with the book of Kings, 1 Kings, Melachim. We got up to chapter 5. Before we begin, though, we're going to take a very, very important detour. When I was preparing the next chapters, 5, 6, and 7, I was referred to go to the book of Chronicles, Divrei Yamim, the first book of Chronicles. There's Divrei Yamim, Aleph and Bet, the first book and the second book. And what I found was something that I thought was very, very amazing. And that's where we're going to start. So for those who were here or not, I'm going to review that the first chapter or 2 of the book of Kings describes how David Melech is sick in bed. He's towards the end of his life. His son Adoniyahu rebels against him and declares himself king. And the prophet Natan and Bathsheba kind of join forces and tell the king and convince him that it's been his intention to appoint Shlomo, Bathsheba's son, as king. And you better do it now because Adoniyahu has already declared himself king. Excuse me. And that's what David does. And all of this is like in the first chapter of the book of Kings. Shlomo is taken down to the Mea Shiloach, the water source of Jerusalem in the city of David, and he's anointed king. He's now king. And then David speaks to his son and basically gives him strength and advice. The main advice is follow the Torah. If you follow the Torah, everything will be good. If you don't follow the Torah, everything's going to fall apart. And in the end, he gives him some instructions what to do with certain people. And then the text says David dies, and he's buried in the city of David. And it recaps that he was king for 40 years, 7 in Hebron and 33 in Jerusalem. And then the story continues with Shlomo is now king. So when I'm preparing it, now we're in chapter 5, and Shlomo's well into his being king. I was referred back to the book of Chronicles, and there's a whole section. That's what we're going to start the class with tonight. We're going to actually spend a good amount of time because it's part of the story that is not recorded in the book of Melachim. And it's very, very, very fascinating. So for those who want to follow this, it's chapter 28. We're going to be doing chapters 28 and 29 of the book of Chronicles. And why it's important is because in the book of Melachim, like I said, I just reviewed how the events happened, but there's one event that takes 2 chapters that is not even alluded to in the book of Melachim. And it fills in very much of the story. So in chapter 28 of the book of Chronicles, so it says that David assembled all of the princes of Israel, the princes of the tribes, the captains of his army, and the captains of 1,000s and captains over hundreds, and all the different people who served the king. And he called them all together to Jerusalem. And then it says, and David stood up on his feet, and he begins a speech. Now, again, none of this appears in the book of Melachim. So the question is, when is this happening? When did he assemble all of the people? Well, when we go through chapter 28, we'll understand pretty much when it was, but it's clear is after David has had Shlomo coronated king, and he spoke to him and he gave him advice. This is where this comes in. David gathers all the people together, and it says First Chronicles. It's chapter 28 in First Chronicles, and it says that he literally got out of his deathbed because why did Adoniyahu choose then to declare himself king? Because it was clear to everyone that David was on his last legs. And so he wanted to jump in and make himself king, even though it's clear from what we're going to read now that David had already made clear to everyone that Shlomo would be the next king. So here we have a question. What was Adoniyahu thinking? It was like almost public knowledge that David had chosen Shlomo. And here David says it's really God who chose Shlomo and revealed it to David. David had many sons. But this is the son of Bathsheba. In a certain way, his most important wife. And so he gathers everyone together after Shlomo has already been anointed king. And he says to all of the people, he says, truthfully, it was my idea to build a temple for God. And I wanted to move the Ark of the Covenant into a permanent building. And here is the source. We spoke about it before, but it's not really explicit. But here, God said to him, you will not build the house. Your son will build the house because you're a man of war and you've shed a lot of blood. So this is quoted by everyone. But here it's explicit. So David is telling the people, I wanted to build a house for God, but God said, you're not the one. But God chose me. He's telling all the people, God chose me from all of the people because I'm from the tribe of Yehuda. And Yehuda, they were always destined to be the kings. Where do we see this? Where do we see that Yehuda was always destined to be kings? This is in the blessing that Yaakov gives Yehuda before he dies. And there it's clear that the kings of Israel will come from the tribe of Yehuda. But he's just reminding everyone. He's reminding me, I'm from Yehuda, and that is why God chose someone from Yehuda to be the king. And he says, God gave me many, many sons, but he has chosen Shlomo. Again, almost every part of this story is not found in the book of Kings. And it fills in a lot of like the history of how everything happened. So he said it's Shlomo who was chosen by God. Obviously, God revealed this to David. It wasn't just that Bathsheba was his favorite wife. We had already learned that one of the reasons she was named Bathsheba, Sheva literally means the daughter of seven, but Sheva also is from the same root as Shavua, a promise. And we learned that when Bathsheba was first together with David, because she had a prophecy that kings would come from her, just like Tamar had a prophecy that kings would come from her and Yehuda, she made him promise that their son would become king. But nonetheless, this is revealing that at some point, God revealed to David that Shlomo is the right person to take over the throne, and that he will build the temple. And God also revealed that through Shlomo, the kingship of David will last forever. All of this is in the 28th chapter of the first book of Chronicles. And God revealed to David that he should make sure that Shlomo understands that his kingship will only last if he follows the mitzvot of God. And that is what in the book of Melachim, David does tell Shlomo. He says very clearly, this is how your kingship will last. But here it's saying that God is instructing David to instruct Shlomo, that is how his kingdom will last. And he said, and just the language here is so beautiful. So it says, now David is speaking to Shlomo. Obviously, Shlomo is at this gathering. And he says, V'ata Shlomo, B'ni, and now Shlomo, my son, Da et Elokei Avicha. You should know the God of your fathers. V'avdehu, and you shall serve him, B'lev Shalem, with a full heart, U'benefesh Chafetza, and a passionate soul. Kikol avot doresh Hashem, because all those who seek out God, v'kol yetzer machshavot mevim, because God understands the thoughts of everything that He has formed. Mevina tidrid shenu, and He understands all those who seek Him out. Yematzelach v'yim tazvenu yagiacha la'ad. But if you abandon God, you will be pushed away. And then he tells them, you should take heed because God has chosen you to build the temple and be strong and do it. And then there's a lot of details here, but it's important to the general idea. It says, then David gave Shlomo the pattern of the temple. Now, this is really, really important because here we don't see it in the book of Melachim that Shlomo was handed like the blueprints, the architectural blueprints for the temple. And there's a lot of details here, but not only did he give him the plans, but he also gave him all of the gold and silver and bronze that he would need to build the temple and all of its vessels. So that takes about 10 verses. And then it says, in a very, very important verse, it says, Hakol bichtav miyad Hashem elai. So David is speaking to Shlomo, and it says, all of this is written by the hand of God, elai, that was given to me. Hiskil kol malachot hatavni, to understand the entire plan for the pattern of the temple. So what does it mean? It was written by the hand of God. So here the commentaries say that David was not alone in this whole enterprise. And they say that when Shmuel was still alive, that he acted with David, first of all, to establish forever the exact place of the Temple Mount and where the temple would be situated on the Temple Mount. That was done kind of like in partnership between David and Shmuel. And this architectural plans also came through the Navi, through the prophet. And so David is handing Shlomo the plans for the temple. Again, none of this is mentioned in the book of Melachim in this exact way. Okay, so it continues. And again, a lot of detail about all the different elements of the temple. of the different rooms and chambers and the whole Temple Mount and the different, like the building of the Mishkan with the menorah and the showbread and the altar, all of these different things. And again, all of the gold and silver and copper that would be used. And then it says, after this whole, he's talking to Shlomo and he's talking to the people. And then we're now in chapter 29. In verse 9, it says, after this whole explanation to the people, and he's speaking to Shlomo in front of all of the people. So it says, "V'yismechu ha'am al hitnadvam ki belev shalem hitnadvu l'Hashem." Now, before this, it talks about that the people also donated to the temple. So this is very much like the Mishkan. When the Mishkan was, the instructions were given to Moshe, he was told, part of the instructions was he was supposed to get, contributions from all of the people. And here also, so it says that the people rejoiced greatly in all of the gifts that they had given with a full heart that they had given to God. V'gam David HaMelech samach simcha gedola. And David experienced a tremendous joy. Tremendous joy. Remember, this is literally at the end of his life. And that's why this is so important, because if I wouldn't have seen that commentary in a certain way, I wouldn't have been able to put this in. It's like a missing part of Melachim in a certain way. And then, starting in the 10th verse of chapter 29, this is a part that is included in the morning prayers every day. At the end of Psuki de Zimra, this next part is incorporated, and it's said every single day. And it says, "Vayavarech David et Hashem le'enei kol hakahal," and David blessed God in the eyes of all of the congregation. V'yomer David Baruch atah Hashem Elokei Yisrael Avinu me'olam bi'ad olam. That's how it begins. Now this is so significant because, first of all, if anyone is looking at the text, there's a yud added to David's name. And it's twice. Vayivorech David et Hashem le'enei kol hakahal v'yomer David Baruch atah Hashem. And both times there's an extra yud. And so we know anytime that a name is changed, here it wasn't changed permanently. It wasn't like God came and said, "I'm adding a yud to your name and you'll now be called this." Because later when his name is mentioned, it's without the yud. But here this represents, remember, it just said that David experienced this incredible joy. And so now when he's blessing the people, that extra yud represents he was on a whole different level right now. He was experiencing, yud is the first letter of God's name. And he was just, he was just flying with inspiration. And so a yud is added to his name. But here, I want everyone to notice that I think we dedicated 2 classes to the influence of David. And I'm not sure if I mentioned this, but I might have, it says that he blessed the people and he said to them, Baruch atah Hashem Elokei Yisrael. So if you're in tune with this, this is how we start every blessing. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu. Here it's Elokei. But here's the beginning of every bracha that we say. And it's really, David is the one who initiates this. When the sages came to encode how we make a blessing, this is their source. Baruch atah Hashem Elokei Yisrael, which is very much like Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech HaOlam. And it even says, and it continues, it says, Avinu me'olam v'ad olam. So this is very, very significant. Very significant. The 10th verse in the 29th chapter. And then another tremendous chiddush here. It continues. L'cha Hashem ha'gedula v'ha'gevura v'ha'tiferet v'ha'netzach v'ha'hod. Ki kol b'shamayim u'va'aretz l'cha Hashem ha'mamlacha amitnaseh l'kol l'rosh. So here, for those of you who have the new book, the Sfirot and Meditation. So one of the chapters I make clear that the structure, the paradigm, the model of the 10 Sfirot as a model never appears in the Tanakh. It doesn't appear in the Gemara either. It only is revealed in later times. Nonetheless, I devote a whole chapter to show that the names of all of the Sfirot and their meaning is found out throughout the Tanakh. It's just not, that's not how the holy book of the Tanakh works. It doesn't explain concepts in a teaching manner. That's just not how the Chumash and the Tanakh work. But here, this is the one place where you have the 7 lower Sfirot in order and named. So again, for those who have the book, there's a whole chapter, and I go through and I show all the places where, not all, many of the places where Chachma, Bina, Dat, Chesed, Gevura, Tiferet, all of these are mentioned in the Tanakh over and over again. But here, so I'll say it again. David says, L'cha Hashem, to you God is Hagedula. Now in the ancient Kabbalah, Chesed was called Gedula. V'Gevura, V'Tiferet, V'Netzach, V'Hod. These are 5 Sfirot in order. And then it says, Ki kol b'shamayim. So it's pointed out in Kabbalah and Chassidut, Ki kol, for everything in heaven and earth. Ki kol is Gematria Yesod. That's the next Sfira. So everything that is in heaven and earth, L'cha Hashem HaMalacha. To you, God is the kingship. That's Malchut. So this, more than any other place in the entire Tanakh, shows the 7 lower Sfirot in their order, all in one verse. There is no other verse like this. There are many verses that have Chachma, Bin, and Dat in the same verse. And there are many that have others together. Usually they're separate. But this one is really the main one. And like I said, we say this every single day in the morning. And it continues. And then he speaks other words that are not included in the daily davening. And then in the 18th verse, it goes back to what is included in the daily davening. So this is just very, very significant. And then one second. And then also going back to the 10th one, where it says, Vayavorech David et Hashem le'enei kol kahal. And David blessed God in the eyes of all of the congregation. This, I didn't see it written, but I am fairly convinced that just like the way, the stamp of how we make a blessing is taken from what I just explained, here I believe that this is the inspiration for saying Baruch Hu. Baruch Hu is how we start the third section of prayer leading into the Shema. It's only said with a minyan. It's one of less than a handful of parts of the prayer that are only said with a minyan. and whoever's leading the davening says, Baruch Hu et Hashem hamavorach. Blessed is God who is to be blessed. And here it says, Vayivorech David et Hashem le'enei kol kahal. So here in front of the whole people, David blesses God. This is the exact sentiment, inspiration of our saying, Baruch Hu et Hashem hamavorach. So these are just such important ideas here in the text. And actually, it's a second time. What I just said, there's a second verse that mirrors exactly what I just said, and that is in the 20th verse of chapter 29, where it says, Vayomer David, again, he has the extra yud in his name. This whole experience, he is inspired. So it says, and David said, L'kol kahal, to the whole congregation, Baruch Hu na et Hashem Elokeichem. Now, please, all of you, bless God, your God. V'yivarchu kol kahal Hashem Elokei Avotehem. And all of the people responded by blessing God. This is exactly how we do our daily davening. The person leading the davening says, Baruch Hu et Hashem hamavorach, and people answer with blessing God. And this is where it comes from. It's quite amazing. This goes. We can add this to, like I said, I think 2 whole classes on the influence of David on Jewish tradition, Jewish history, Jewish prayer, Jewish law. These are our cardinal concepts here. And then it says like this. Now remember, this whole class tonight is trying to reconstruct and fill in a gap in the book of Melachim, where Shlomo is anointed king. David speaks to him and tells him he needs to follow the mitzvot and follow God, and then David dies. Well, this whole story is happening in there. And so here, then it says that they, the words are, it says, Vayeshev Shlomo al Kisei Hashem. Wait 1 second. No. Then they made a big feast, a huge, huge feast, and it describes 1,000 bulls, 1,000 rams, 1,000 lambs, and drink offerings and sacrifices. And they ate and drank before God on that day with great gladness. You can only imagine the scene here. They brought thousands, I mean, we're talking about there were probably tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people there. And so it turned into this huge, huge barbecue. And it says, V'yachlu v'yishtu lifnei Hashem b'yom hahu b'simcha gedola v'yamlichu shenit l'Shlomo ben David v'yimshechu l'Hashem l'nagid u'letzadok l'kohen. So here it says they ate and they drank before God on that day with a tremendous sense of joy, and they anointed Shlomo king a second time. Now we don't have this in the book of Melachim. He was anointed and he became king, but this gathering was really like that was done almost in private, because remember, Adoniyahu had declared himself king and he was gathering people. So they very quickly took Shlomo down and they blew shofars and everything, but it was fairly a private affair. And here, after this whole story, so they re-anoint Shlomo a second time as king. And again, he's called Ben David with the extra yud. And it says, V'yismechu l'Hashem, and they had joy with God. Excuse me. And they anointed him to God to be the leader, and Sadok l'Kohen. And Sadok became the high priest. And he was also anointed. And this we learned previously, the idea of anointing. And then it says, and Shlomo sat on the throne of God, which is also very significant, that the throne of the earthly king, David and Shlomo, here is called Kisei Hashem. And it said he became very successful, and the people listened to him. And then the chapter 29 ends by saying that David ben Yishai ruled for 40 years. This is in Book of Melachim also. 7 years in Hebron, 33 in Jerusalem, and he died. But here it's a little bit more descriptive. It says he died in a good old age. He was full of days, meaning he had lived a full life. He had lived a full life, 70. He was 70 years old, but those 70 years was packed so much in what he accomplished. And then it says, and the acts of King David, they are written in the book of Shmuel and in the book of Natan and in the book of Gad. Now, these are all talking about what we call Shmuel. And because Shmuel dies at a certain point in the story of David, and so then the Gemara asks, well, who finished the book of Shmuel? Because we learned that Shmuel wrote the book of Shmuel, but at a certain point he passed away. And that was Natan, the prophet. And it's interesting because Natan is called a prophet, And God is called a seer. That's how Shmuel was originally called, was called a chozeh, someone who had prophetic sight, but it wasn't called a prophet. So here it probably means that he had what's called Ruach HaKodesh, divine inspiration on a very, very high level. And in that book, it's told the whole story of David and how he ruled over Israel and all of the kingdoms around. And that ends the book of Chronicles 1. Ends there. Chronicles 2 picks up right, pretty much right exactly where we are in the book of Melachim. So even though this was somewhat of a tangent, it was really critical for us to understand the flow of events here. And we learned so many important things tonight. The idea of the influence of David with our daily davening, the Baruch Hu, how we say a blessing, the enumeration of all of the Sfirot. It's very unique. There is no other place in the Tanakh that has all of the Sfirot, even though, like I said, like the word chesed appears probably hundreds of times and applying to people, but mostly to God. So all of the attributes of the Sfirot and their names are completely present in the Tanakh. But just the presentation of the Sfirot as a model of understanding all of reality, that was a secret kind of transmission that wasn't revealed until the time of the Zohar, the Arizal, and later Kabbalah. L'chaim, everyone, l'chaim. Okay, so we have a little bit of time left. We're gonna go back to the 5th chapter of the book of Kings. Don't know if we'll get through all of it, because I have to say, until chapter 7 in the book of Melachim, it's just like there is so much there. And when we get to the actual building of the temple, we're going to go much faster because there's a lot of detail and it's very difficult to understand what is being described here. I have to say. So for right now, we're going slow. So we're beginning in the 5th chapter. And so it says that Shlomo reigned over all the kingdoms from the river to the land of the Pelishtim, to the border of Mitzrayim, Egypt. And all of these kingdoms brought him presents and served Shlomo all the days of his life. Now, when it says from the river, anytime it says the river and it doesn't give a name to it, it's always referring to the Euphrates, Nahar Parat. And so these are the biggest borders, and David left it for him. Shlomo did not fight any wars. He didn't conquer any land, but he took the borders of the kingdom that David gave him, and he established it for his whole reign, which was 40 years also, in an incredible way. He was one of the greatest kings in history. It was a huge kingdom. And here it says, and there were no wars against him, that he was able to rule over this kingdom, and there was peace, like his name, Shlomo. And then it says, it's interesting, it says the provisions for the meals that Shlomo served every day. The point is, he had a lot of servants or people working for him. I wouldn't say servants per se, people working for the kingdom, for the palace. And there were like 100 sheep a day were slaughtered. And this didn't count deer and gazelles and fallow and geese, because he had to serve. Everyone had to eat, right? And so he had what's called the capital. Jerusalem was the capital. David made Jerusalem the capital. And so Shlomo, his kingdom had its governmental offices, as it were, in Jerusalem. And he provided for everyone every day. And then it says that he had 40,000 stalls of horses for his chariots and 12,000 horsemen. And no one lacked anything. So the question is, why did Shlomo need 40,000 stalls for horses and chariots and 12,000 horsemen? In a certain way, there's a certain criticism built in here, because in the Torah, when in Parshat Shoftim, when the laws of kings are first given in like shorthand, the one thing it says is that the king should not amass many horses and should not return the people to Egypt. So then the question is, why did he need so many horses? So some say we have to go through this whole book, that there is certain criticisms of Shlomo. Nonetheless, there is an opinion. How was it that he ruled over this huge kingdom? As we're going to see, people brought him gifts. People came from all over the world to learn wisdom from Shlomo. People came from all over the world to come to the temple. We have to get the picture here. And so one of the commentaries says he had all of these horses and chariots to make sure in today's call it military strategy, how do you keep the peace? By showing how strong you are, and don't mess with us. We're prepared. So this is one of the commentaries, and I'm sure there's something to this, that Shlomo didn't fight wars, and he had peace in his kingdom. But it could be because everyone saw that he was prepared. He was ready. Don't mess with Shlomo. So that's one of the explanations. The other one is, at a certain point, we'll see that it could have been one of the shortcomings of Shlomo, that he amassed such wealth. But right after that, it says that God gave Shlomo very much wisdom and understanding and largeness of heart, like the sand is on the seashore. So you might think, well, if God wanted to criticize Shlomo, why did he go ahead and give him so much wisdom? We already learned last week about the dream that Shlomo had. where God said, I will grant you anything that you want, just ask. And Shlomo said, just give me a understanding heart so I can judge the people properly. And God said, since you answered like that, not only will I give you that, but I'll give you basically all the wealth and the power in the world. So here, if we're just looking at the simple chronological flow of the verses, it doesn't seem that God is upset that he has so many horses and chariots. And it goes on to say that Shlomo's wisdom exceeded the wisdom of all of the children of the East. And now this, and then it goes on, and all the wisdom of Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim at that time was still a major power in the world. And of course, Avram came from the East. And there was what we call the East now. It was known about. And that Shlomo was wiser than all of them. And it says that he spoke 3,000 proverbs and 5 and 1,000 songs. There is a lot of commentary on what does this mean exactly. Some say of these 3,000, we only have two, the book of Proverbs and the book of Ecclesiastes, Mishlei and Kohelet. Those are two of the 3,000. Others say that every parable that Shlomo said, he could explain it in 3,000 different ways. That's how wise he was. Another explanation I saw is that the book of Proverbs there's a whole question when it says 5 and 1,000 songs. If it means songs that we think of like music. So one explanation is that, and it actually mentions that he was a master of music. But one of the explanations is that Mishlei, I didn't look it up exactly, but in this commentary, it says it has 500 verses and a combination of Song of Songs, Shir Shirim, and Kohelet, both together have 1,000. And so the 1,000 are Shir Shirim and Kohelet, and the five is actually the 500 of Mishlei. Like I say, many, many different explanations of all of these proverbs. But obviously, it's telling us that he was very inspired, very wise. And then it says, and he spoke of trees, from the cedar tree that is in Lebanon to the hyssop that comes out of the wall. He spoke also of animals and birds and creeping things and fishes. And then it says, and this is a very, very important verse, and there came of all people to hear the wisdom of Shlomo from all kings of the earth who had heard of his wisdom. In other words, the wisdom of Shlomo, this is before modern technology. Nonetheless, the wisdom of Shlomo spread throughout the entire known world, and kings of kingdoms all over the world sent their wise men to learn from Shlomo, and then, of course, they brought it back. So this is a very, very important idea, because for those who come to our Tuesday class, sometimes we get into discussions of parallel teachings from the Eastern religions and Judaism. And the question is, well, how did all of that happen? And the two answers that we propose is that we know that Avram sent his sons to the east from his second wife, Hagar, Keturah, with gifts, which is 3,700 years ago. Shlomo is reigning approximately 1,000 years ago, 2,900 years ago. And so it's clear that the wisdom of from Avram to Shlomo in between is the giving of the Torah. That these teachings did reach the entire world. What the whole world did with it, that's a big question. That's a big question. Just like it's known that both Christianity and Islam are born out of Judaism. What they did with it is another story. But here we see with Shlomo, his wisdom went to the entire world. Almost literally went to the whole world. And we'll see that once the temple was built, people came from all over the world. And we'll read the speech that Shlomo makes, asking God, when people come from all over the world to this place, and they come to recognize you, answer their prayers. This was the prayer of Shlomo. So here we're going to end with this idea that it says that he spoke about the trees, and the animals and the birds and everything. But many of the commentaries it's not that he spoke, it's not only that he spoke about all of these things, but he spoke with them. That Shlomo knew the language of the animals, the birds, the trees, and even the inanimate. That he was that wise. And the Torah says that the type of wisdom, we learned this last week, the type of wisdom that God gave Shlomo, it says no one before him or after him had that wisdom, though one of the commentaries on that is that there's one exception, and that is Moshe. That in certain aspects, Moshe was wiser than Shlomo. But in general, he is described as the capital T, wisest person who ever lived. And so then there are many midrashim about him talking to the animals and understanding them. And many midrashim come out of this, and quite interesting. Later, we will get into the whole idea of Shlomo being not only a master of the elements in this world, the animals and nature in this world, but he also became a wise in the language and the reality of demons and negative forces. And it's in the Talmud. There's many stories about Shlomo's adventures and experiences with what are called the forces of the other side. That's a whole other discussion that we will get to. I'll end with just one midrash that says that last week we already saw that Shlomo was a great judge because of his wisdom. So the midrash says that if two people came with a disagreement over land ownership, and one claimed these trees, they're in my yard, in my possession, and the other one says no, they're in my possession. And so the midrash says that Shlomo would go to the trees and say, just tell me, in whose yard are you? Just clarify the matter here. And that's how he would know the difference. And there's another midrash, not with Shlomo, but it was just a general idea of two people came to court and they were arguing over who's owns a certain piece of land. And so it says that a voice would come out of heaven and said, you don't own the land and you don't own the land. I own the land. You are sojourners with me. It's one of the verses in the Torah. And that's where it comes from, where God says, ultimately, you are all sojourners with me. The land is mine. So we'll end with that idea. May we all be blessed with even a little bit of the wisdom of Shlomo, which, by the way, we get through learning Torah. Okay, l'chaim, l'chaim.